My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
We've been chatting for years now, and I'm a big admirer of your work, and your work has influenced me a lot over the years. I'm very happy to say.
It's very kind.
So I've been having a few discussions recently about multipolarity. Now, I, in its truest sense, am a fan of multipolarity. And I think that the term has been hijacked, and I think that's probably where the schism has come in. When we talk about multipolarity, what are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about a regional balance of power system of global governance. That's essentially what the idea is. And I think, if we consider that we had, probably, let's take it in the post-Second World War period, we had what we might call a bipolarity. We had the Cold War, so we had broadly East versus West or West versus East. But I think it's more important to say we had an Eastern sphere of Soviet influence and a Western sphere of US Anglo-American influence. So bipolarity. After the end of the Soviet era and probably most significantly the taking down of the Berlin Wall and the end of glasnost and perestroika and so forth. Well, then what we had then was a period of unipolarity where there was only really one superpower in the world. So we had a global system of power exerted by a dominant superpower, and then the hoped for transition. And I would point out that at the end of the kind of what we might call the bipolar period and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, it was the hoped for transition at that point was to multipolarity. You get the think tanks like the Council on Foreign Relations and so forth. That's what they envisaged. That's what they thought would happen. But it didn't happen straight away. We had this unipolar moment. And the unipolar moment has not been good for the world. Obviously there's been a lot of, that's come with a lot of military aggression and a lot of violence and proxy wars all over the place. And then, now we're seeing, but since then, certainly in the last 40 or 50 years, seen a significant rise of China as a economic and technological power, and increasingly a military power, and Russia asserting its independence, really. And that's moved us towards this period of multipolarity, as it's envisaged to be, which is a regional, as I said, would be a more global governance system based on a regional distribution of power. So
on the face of it, it looks good. On the face of it.
Yeah. And it could be, the idea of multipolarity could be much better for the world. It could be much better. And, it could mean less war. It could mean less conflict. It could mean better trading relationships, more competition, better in many, many respects. So, yeah, that's what multipolarity could be. My argument is that is certainly not what it is intended to be by the people who are actually pulling the strings. So I guess it boils down to, in my view, whether or not you think governments are in charge, or whether you think actually transnational capitalists are in charge. In my view, it's transnational capitalists.
So now where does the discrepancy come in?
Well, I think it's important to. I reached out to you following the talk that you did with Charles and Mike at UK Column and your video. Multipolarity is better than sliced bread, or whatever it was. I can't remember the name.
Yeah, it was quite a funny title.
Yeah, that was good because of the funny comment that Charles made at the end. So And the thing that I noted was that what you were arguing in terms of the arguments against multipolarity, that it suggested that that people like myself that criticise multipolarity are in favour of unipolarity, which we're not, or I'm not. I don't speak for anybody else.
So in other words, it would be a false dichotomy.
Yeah, and I don't speak for anybody else, but certainly in my criticisms of multipolarity, I'm certainly not suggesting that we should carry on with this kind of US Anglo-Zionist now, US Zionist and Anglo as well, Zionist dominance, because obviously that's not good. That's not good for the world. And also, we're not necessarily criticising the idea of multipolarity. The idea of what it could be, as in preference to a unipolar order, or what some people call the international rules-based order. It could be better, but it certainly isn't heading that way. You can look at the comments of, for example, Sergei Lavrov recently speaking to the Russian Institute at RAAC. I can't remember the full title of it, but saying about, what we're seeing is a breakdown in order as we move towards this new multipolar envisaged world, and that's very much the case. But I would argue that what multipolarity suggests, as it is unfolding, is not actually a reduction in war. I think there'll be more war, but it'll be a different type of war. It'll be more hybrid war. There'll be more, I would say, localized skirmishes. So, for example, if you take what China's doing at the moment with regard to the Ukraine war, it is providing what they call dual-use technology, which is military technology. It's providing it to both sides, providing it to the Russians and the Ukrainians. So China is militarizing very heavily, and you could say that that's a defensive strategy. Of course, all countries say that they militarize for defensive strategies. But whether it's going to exert more military authority in certainly in with regard to the Taiwan issue, whether that will play out that way, who knows? But certainly China is militarizing, so that is concerning. If peace and less war is the hope, so that's what I would. And fundamentally, what I would say, and I think where a lot of people are coming from with regard to criticising multipolarity, is why do we need any kind of world order? Why do we need global governance of any kind? Right? Why do we need this centralized system of governance? What benefit is that to anybody? And another thing that came up in the discussion, and Mike Robinson from UK Column was talking about the Westphalian model and how that is preferable to certainly to the rules-based order and that unipolarity. Let's stick with simple things: the unipolarity versus multipolarity. That is preferable to unipolarity. It certainly is, but I would also say it's preferable to multipolarity. The Westphalian model is a decentralized system of global governance, if you like. So decentralization is better. So why do we need any kind of global order at all, is the question. Yeah.
The question of why do we need any kind of world order is obviously well taken, and I would agree with that. Why would you want to be a slave? I get that. But isn't that replacing one kind of hopium with another? Because one of the criticisms is that, well, multipolarity is just hopium. But isn't not wanting any world order also just hopium?
this is the problem when we get down to discussing these kind of things, and even if we talk about the notion of challenging government authority, it is everything will remain hopium unless people do something about it. So there's no point talking about people having more independent lives and freeing themselves up from reliance upon government systems if they don't do anything about it. There's no point talking about real libertarian principles, not the kind of libertarian principles that promoted people like Peter Thiel, but the actual real libertarian principles. They're not going to work. It is just hopium unless somebody does something about it. Unless you're prepared to make the changes in your life that will enable you to achieve the things that you want to achieve, if that's important to you, then it's all hopium. Everything is. Everything is hopium unless people act. They have to act. So, you could say the same about absolutely everything. So hoping that that a better global order could emerge. I mean, my problem with with hoping that multipolarity specifically might be better is that then you need to look at who's designed it, why they designed it, why are we heading in this direction? What is it that it is likely to deliver? What does it look like at the moment? And what it looks like is the imposition globally of a technocratic order. That's what it looks like.
Yes, it does look like that. And it probably will be like that because we know that Russia and China and all of those global south countries very much did the same thing during COVID. Is it possible, Ian, to compartmentalize rather than employ a kind of binary thinking? Like, okay, on the macro scale, it is all heading in the same direction. But on the short-term, immediate micro scale, there are definitely differences which are beneficial to, say, those of us living on the African continent.
Yeah, I mean, there are differences with the way. So, for example, if you look at the way China uses its debt diplomacy, it's different from the way that traditionally the IMF has used debt diplomacy. So, for example, Cuba at the moment, China is offering to install massive solar arrays in Cuba to help alleviate its problems with obviously with all the blackouts that it suffered and its energy infrastructure. So China has come in and said, we'll help you out. Rather than impose loans on you, we will actually help by building building infrastructure for you. However, it will be Chinese firms that build it. It will be controlled by Chinese firms. Chinese multinationals will do the construction. You will have to pay us for the construction. You will owe us money for that. There will be a debt, and obviously that will be a Chinese-owned debt. So it's still debt trap diplomacy, but it comes with infrastructure rather than boots on the ground soldiers pointing a gun at your head. So from that perspective, yeah, sure, that's better. That's better. But why?
That's setting the bar quite low, though.
Yeah, setting the bar low. But that is that's better. In my experience, I mean, one of the things that I experienced, I spent quite a lot of time in East and Southern Africa, Southeast Africa.
Malawi, I think you said.
I was in Malawi and Tanzania and Zambia and all around there for quite a while. And in Malawi, China had a deal to build a hospital. So they were going to build a hospital, and they obviously it wasn't free, but they were quite happy to build a couple of new hospitals in Malawi, and the Malawian government agreed, and China came and built the hospitals, and that's what they built. They built the shell of a hospital, and then the Malawian government said, "Well, hang on a minute. It's just a concrete construction. It's not actually a hospital. There's no equipment in it. There's nothing." And China says, "Well, you didn't say anything. You didn't say anything about putting any equipment or any beds or anything like that in it. We've built a hospital, but there's nothing in it. That will be more. So it isn't it is debt diplomacy, but it's debt diplomacy with a smile, and debt diplomacy with a different. And if you look at like the BRICS development banks like NDB and the Asian Development Bank and so forth, they are in partnership. They are working in partnership with the IMF and the World Bank. They're not opposed to what the IMF and the World Bank are doing. Or rather, I would look at it the other way, actually. The IMF and the World Bank are not opposed to what they're doing. So that's why they're working in partnership together. So it's not like they are at odds.
One of the realities, Ian, though, is if you look at the African continent, it is dominated by Western powers, completely dominated. You've got, I think, around 14 countries that still use the French currency and controlled effectively by Europe. You've got South Africa, which is effectively driven by mining and agriculture. I think every single mine is foreign owned. At least some degree of sovereignty being taken back would be a good thing long term, don't you think?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. It would be a good thing. Obviously, I mean, South Africa's, I was looking at some figures the other day. So South Africa's got the highest rate of, if on the Gini measurement of economic inequality, South Africa's got the highest rate of economic inequality in the world.
Yes.
So the disparity between those that have access to capital and resources and those that don't is the greatest in South Africa in the world. So if that sovereignty means, a rebalancing of that problem, great. That would be great. And if sovereignty can be achieved, for example, if the South African people through their government can buy back some of their resources and buy back, because they're not going to get there, because that's the point, they'll have to buy them back. They won't be given back, they'll have to buy them. That would be great. But I mean, I'm not sure that is going to happen as a result of China having a greater influence or Russia, or the BRICS. The BRICS itself having a greater influence in South African domestic politics. Do you see that happening?
No, I don't see it happening. At least anytime soon. What I do see happening is an increase in good trade relations between us and China, and that is noticeable on a day-to-day level. We have almost no tariffs, which is a huge deal when you have a lot of poor people.
Certainly, yeah. Access to Chinese manufactured products and services. That's going to be helpful. I mean, if you look at but I mean, so if you look at the way that the current unipolar world, or the Western world order worked, what the West has done is it's, if you like, it's ahead of South Africa, and it's ahead of that in a way, because the Western world has been reliant upon Chinese manufacturing for longer. It's been reliant on Chinese manufacturing for 50 years, for 40 years. So Chinese products and services are everywhere in the Western world because it's the manufacturing hub of the planet. So tariffs come along with questionable political moves that are happening in the Western, and sanctions. So if you look at how tariffs and sanctions work, it is to degrade and to Western economies. So obviously, if you have a tariff war with the country that is manufacturing and also producing, and if we combine that with Russia as well, which is a resource-rich country, and China is to a great extent, but not so much in oil, but energy from Russia, and manufactured goods and services and technological development from China. If you cut yourself off from that as some sort of political statement, which is what certainly the Trump administration is doing, that's isolationist and that's acting against your own economic interests. So why would you do that? Why? I mean, if you look at the European sanctions, the sanctions that they imposed on Russia in terms of energy, taking Russian energy, all that's done is hobble the EU economy. Now the EU has to buy really expensive LNG from the US, which is it's not in the EU's economic interest to do with what they did. So why did they do it? I mean, you can argue that that's because in response to a quote unquote war, which was a bizarre war, because all the way through it, Russia's been paying gas transit fees to the Ukrainians to bolster their economy throughout a war with it. 40% of Ukrainian diesel that fueled their military armor came from Russian Lukoil refineries in Bulgaria throughout the war. That's a weird war where you are ensuring that your enemy can fight. So there's many weird things that are playing out on the global stage at the moment, and it is all heading towards multipolarity. The world is being driven towards multipolarity.
Sorry, go on, Ian.
No, you carry on.
No, I was going to say, so I've been having a number of conversations in my circles about this, and a number of the sort of quote unquote neocon type friends will say, yes, but you see, Trump imposing tariffs is a way to encourage local manufacturing. I think that's absurd. I don't agree with that. But it is a genuine argument that is consistently made.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the kind of as the US becomes more isolationist, so it's on paper it's becoming more isolationist. Pulling out of Kyoto, threatening to pull out of the UNFCCC, pulling out of the World Health Organization, or threatening to distance itself from that, distancing itself from NATO and the UN.
Those are good things, though.
Those are good things if that means a better outcome for humanity. If that means a better outcome for humanity, then those are good things. It doesn't, because what is the US doing? It's extending its influence over Central and South America. It's looking to expand its military influence in the polar region. It's in words and somewhat in deeds. It is drawing the American technate. It's pulling that together. So if you think about the North American technate being a pole, then you've got the European Union and being a pole, the Eurasian Union being another potential pole. The Asian Union, which is proposed by China, which would be, linking up ASEAN and the GCC, the Gulf. I've forgotten what it stands for now, but linking them together. So that is the balkanization of the world, which would be required for a unipolar world order, for a multipolar world order. That is the basic kind of structure of it. So that is happening. So they're doing it. The question is, will that be beneficial for people? Will that be beneficial for us? Well, certainly if you're rebalancing global economies, that would be better for people potentially in developing and emerging economies. Will their standard of living raise? Let's hope so. Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. But it also means that people in the West are probably going to get used to. It's not like they want to raise everybody to the same level of consumption and the same level of largesse, really, that people in developed nations have enjoyed for the last 50 years, 60 years. That's not the idea. It's to slightly raise the economic prospects of people living in developing and emerging economies, but also lower the prospects and the economic potential of people already living in developed nations. It's not to raise all houses simultaneously or raise all boats simultaneously. It's to slightly raise one and lower the other. That's the mean, because the ultimate objective, and people like the Rockefellers have been talking this, and the um, um, think tanks like the Trilateral Commission and the Bilderbergers and all these kind of people have been planning this out for a very, very, very long time. Is to put this multipolar world order in place so that the transnational capitalists, the oligarch class, can more easily manage the bureaucracy of global governance and impose their own will on it. That's what it's for. That's the objective of it. Not and sure, whether relatively speaking, whether some people benefit from it and some people lose out by it, sure. But ultimately we are all going to be subjected to the technocratic control of transnational capitalist oligarchs. That's what it's for. That's the idea of it.
Which you also refer to as the 3PP, or the 3Ps, I beg your pardon.
Yeah, well, yeah, or G3P to make it easier, global public-private partnership. But yeah, I mean, which is everywhere, which you see that. I mean, ironically.
But then why? Yes, go on.
Well, no, ironically, I wrote about that quite a few years ago, and now there's a Wikipedia page for global public-private partnership, which didn't exist when I first started writing about it, saying that exactly that. It's about a way of administering global affairs, which it is. That's what it is. But it is a top-down hierarchical structure with governments somewhere in the middle.
Unipolarity and multipolarity ultimately are the same thing in the end. Why worry about it?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't say they were necessarily ultimately the same thing. They're different models of global order. They're different models of global order, but unipolarity was a mistake. I mean, I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote it, but he was a senior analyst for the Council on Foreign Relations. But when he wrote about the unipolar moment, which is where we get the term unipolarity from, he openly said, this wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to transition from the intention was, the think tank intention was that we would transition from a bipolarity, Cold War situation into a more multipolar situation. When Carol Quigley was looking at what the ideas were that were coming out of the US think tanks in the at the sort of beginning of the 20th century and through the early part of the 20th century and in early post-war period, what they were aiming for was a three powers world, which was the same as the Trilateral Commission's idea of a three powers world. You know what I mean? You've got the Mackinder kind of heartland idea that the battle for this Eurasian kind of space, which Lavrov now refers to as the world majority, which it is, because it takes in the India as well and China. So it is the world majority, and part of it is considered to be the global south. When you think about the think tanks obsession with battling for control of this space, the best way that they could think of for doing that was multipolarity. Multipolarity would enable the control of that space, geographical space. Mackinder's heartland, it would multipolarity. Now, there's always been resistance against that, So if you read Brzezinski, he was very much in favour of maintaining unipolarity because he was an American exceptionalist. So, but times change. Certainly, the amazing amount of foreign direct investment that went from west to east, certainly, to enable China's technological development and its economic transition. Not that China wouldn't have been able to do it itself, but it wouldn't have been able to do it so fast, I would suggest, without that massive transfer of wealth and technology from west to east. Because why were they doing that? Why were multinational corporations doing that? Why were the Rockefellers so hell bent on building up the Chinese economy? Because you could say, well, that is just an economically good idea because you're developing a massive market, which is good for everybody. But B, it's because they very firmly had in their mind the idea of moving to a multipolar world order. That's I mean, you've got the Club of Rome putting out the 10 Kingdoms model, multipolar world order in I want to say 1950s, but I think that might be wrong. It might have been the 1970s. Anyway, but certainly more than 50 years ago. So they this is what they want. This is what they want. So why do they want it?
Well, I've read Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. I'm not sure if you read it. It's an excellent book.
I know.
And he makes a number of arguments, but he essentially says that democracy is a terrible system and monarchy is actually better and he lists throughout the book why, a bunch of reasons, and it's an incredibly compelling argument. But he says, look, ultimately natural order where you don't have any state governing you is the best. But in the absence of natural order, which seems completely unlikely based on the history of humanity, then he would opt for monarchy over democracy. Now, I'm saying this because I'm making a parallel. We are probably always going to have state control.
Well, no. I haven't read that, so I need to read that. But what we might call spontaneous order is how the world works. The world works through spontaneous order. If you look at how, for example, I mean, there's a very good book that I might recommend you called I, Pencil, written by a guy called Leonard E. Read. Leonard E. Read? I think it was Leonard Read. Who basically explains how a pencil is manufactured. So how is a pencil manufactured? Well, someone's got to mine the graphite, someone's got to mine the ore, the iron ore, someone's got to fell the timber, someone's got to manufacture the manufacturing process is global. That ends up, this immensely complex supply chain and production chain, global production chain, all culminates to deliver a little pencil. But nobody in that chain, anywhere along that line, no one is being told what to do by anyone. Everybody is simply acting in their own self-interest, commercial self-interests, working together in order to ultimately produce a pencil. Now, there's no order in that. If you look at how international relations function currently, while we have nascent global governance systems like the United Nations, actually there is no one in charge of international relations. International relations operates between, okay, so you have things like treaties and nominally international law, but it's just countries working together by agreement. So there's no one in charge. There is no power. The point of the multipolar world order is to impose a power structure on it. That's the point of it. So we're going from a situation where spontaneous order actually exists, and it actually is the dominant structure of the earth, contrary to what people constantly say, that it doesn't exist, that it can never happen. It is how it happens. That is what we've got now. So the difficulty that we have is that because people think that having a power structure imposed on you is essential. So if you're arguing, for example, that monarchy is a better form of government, so did Aristotle and Plato, right? So, yeah, right. So that's what they say. Democracy is a bad idea. Well, for a start, when people talk about democracy, they're talking about representative democracy, and that isn't democracy. Democracy has got nothing to do with electing people to tell you what to do. That's representative democracy, which is a different thing entirely. Democracy, if you go back to ancient Greece, this guy called Cleisthenes came up with the idea, which was the basis of the the republic, really, was or the democratic part, democracy, democratia, he called it, was the rule of law through the exercise. It was just people coming together and abiding by the rule of law. So they agree what the rule of law is, i.e., we don't think it's right that you steal somebody else's possessions, or we don't think it's right that you kill someone. And just ensuring that they all live by some rule mechanism, which for him was trial by jury, that they live through some mechanism collectively together by which they agree to enforce what they agree to be the law. There's no government, there's no hierarchy, there's no somebody telling somebody what to do. That is democracy. And if you look at international law, it kind of operates along those, or let's put it this way, it is supposed to operate along those lines. So when people say, and as they constantly do, as you've just raised there, that spontaneous order, which is the opposite of imposed order, or the antithesis to imposed order, can't work, and there's no examples of it working anywhere. It is how the planet functions. It is how the planet currently functions. It is spontaneous order. The problem that we've got is that governments and power structures, and not so much governments even, governments are just a tool used by power structures, is that power structures, which are transnational and capitalist at the moment, are constantly seeking to exert their power and control over spontaneous order. And while we carry on going along with that by, for example, thinking that multipolarity might be better than unipolarity, rather than questioning the fundamental concept of whether any kind of hierarchical global power structure is necessary at all, which it isn't, and we know that because we function perfectly well without it. So that is what I would suggest is where we should be looking at this from, which is where the the different perspectives that you and I have, how they jar against each other when we're talking about this issue of multipolarity.
Let me give you an example, right? So if you have the opportunity to buy, in my case, I always use my car as an example because it's a big expense. Buying a Chinese car, which has the same feature set as, say, a German car or an American car, but for a third of the price, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, and of course I understand that. I mean, if I was faced with that choice, which one would I choose of the two? Of course, I'd go with the cheaper option that's just as good. But if they're modern cars, if they're modern construction, both the German car and the Chinese car will be built with inbuilt obsolescence in them, so that you have to buy another one eventually, sooner rather than later. Right? So that's the thing. I mean, when I say about I wouldn't necessarily choose that path. I mean, let's say, I currently live in the UK, right? So I could have a perfectly stable power supply, right? But I haven't. I've gone offline because I haven't got one, right? So, and I'm off because I've chosen to live off the grid, which is a bit harder. That's a bit harder and a bit less convenient. I could get a better price when I have to use supermarkets if I use a store card, because then you get a better deal with a store card. But I don't want to. I'm not using a store card because I know what that means. That's pushing me towards digital currency, basically. There are lots of things that we can take advantage of. And one of the things that another thing that people often say is, there's a lack of solutions offered by people that question global in this case, multipolarity. Well, there aren't. That's not true either. I mean, we are suggesting solutions, but unfortunately, they're not the solutions that anybody wants to hear, because they're
Well, let's talk about some of those.
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to suggest that, we need to think about being independent, totally independent, because everything that we're heading towards exerts centralized control over our lives. That's the point of the multipolar world order, just as is much the point of any kind of world order, is to exert centralized control over our lives. So the obvious antidote to that is to free yourself of controlling power structures. But that's not easy. It's not easy, and it's not convenient, and it's not good. And I would see it from this way. So let's say that, if looking at it from the African perspective, for the vast majority of people in South Africa and, in the whole sort of sub-Saharan African region, life is hard. It's harder than it is for people living in the US or living in Europe. Life is harder. It's already harder. They already have to make harder choices than most people in the privileged West would even be able to contemplate or understand. So, of course, if someone comes along and says, we can alleviate some of your difficulties by opening up your economy to give you more choices and more advantage, of course, you would leap at that chance, because it's got to be better than what you've got at the moment, right? So I totally understand that. I totally get it, and I fully support that choice, because it's not the same as I've done the opposite. I've given up some of my luxuries and my conveniences because out of choice, because it's a choice I can make. Would I have done that when I had a young family and kids to? Not probably not. Probably not. That would have been very different. So, that's it. It's in a way I'm making these choices because I have the luxury to make the choice. Because I'm a privileged Mzungu, right? So I have that choice.
A comment that Mike made in that discussion that you referenced earlier is that all of these discussions around the critique of uni and multipolarity come from a Western eye, a Western perspective.
I mean, let's take this. Let's take the example of Nigeria, right? Nigeria is a different case because in Africa that is already a fairly strong emerging, fairly strong economy already. But there's it's still by Western standards, it's still got a lot of wealth inequality, and there's still a lot of a degree of hardship that most privileged Westerners probably wouldn't understand for a lot of people that live in Nigeria, right? Now, when they try to impose what central bank digital currency on Nigerians, because they've got a cash economy, Nigerians didn't react to that very well. Now, if you've got nothing, if you live in Malawi, for example, where you are like proper poor. Is there, and someone says, oh, we're going to introduce, I mean, for a start, you couldn't do it in Malawi because there isn't any banking infrastructure there to speak of, any kind of, that most people don't have access to the infrastructure that you would need in order to introduce a digital currency, so you wouldn't be able to do it unless you introduce the infrastructure first. So and I mean, I haven't kept up with what's going on in Malawi currently. You probably know more about it than I do, but I do know that Chinese firms have gone in there and are assisting it to improve its infrastructure in many ways, which is great. But why? Is it because China want to improve the lives of the people that live in Malawi? Maybe, and the net effect of what they're doing, perhaps it will improve their lives. Good, which would be good. But it's also so that they can impose ultimately technological control on the people that live in Malawi.
What about a less cynical argument? And that is simply, well, these are developing countries and these are opportunities to make money. And it's purely pragmatic.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, as I was saying, if I lived in South Africa and I was looking at a choice between unipolarity, the unipolar world order, which is, the US demanding that you do whatever it says, or multipolarity, which is, the BRICS nations coming together and saying, hey guys, let's trade and let's have, let's bring inward investment from China in terms of infrastructure development. Let's do that. Then of course I would go for the multipolar option. That makes perfect sense.
So another argument that we haven't really brought up is the idea that there are competing factions for these global governance orders.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm very much. I don't think there's a very interesting series. I don't know whether you've had a chance to see it, but David Bro's Pyramid of Power, where he discusses. He's done it. It's taken him years, but he discusses the big kind of what might be called conspiratorial kind of themes, like who's actually in control, who's running the world. And ultimately, I agree with him, and it's very much my thesis that there is no one power that controls the world. Because ironically, because actually human beings function through spontaneous order. We're animals that fight for supremacy. That is part of, how spontaneous order inevitably is part of that. So I mean, even the use of no power structure would mean that you would have to accept limitations on your behavior as an individual. You have to commit to live as an honorable human being. If people can't do that, then you need someone to put some sort of order on it. If people can't abide by basic, principles, so there is an element of that in spontaneous order. But if you're talking about this one single all-powerful entity that controls the world, personally, I don't think that exists. I think there's a network of I would put it this way. There is a class, I sometimes refer to them as the parasite class, but call them what you like, oligarchs, transnational capitalists, whatever. There is a class of people, probably not that great in number. David Rothkopf suggests about
the committee of 300.
300. I don't think it. See, that is, to me, that is one single. Quigley spoke about the society of the elect. That kind of thing. The Rounds Milner Group control everything. And I think there have been periods in history where groups like that have been dominant. So certainly the Anglo-American establishment, Rounds Milne, the Round Table movement, and all those think tanks that come from that certainly have had global influence and continue to have global influence today. But as that has spread out, it has incorporated, people with their own ideas, Chinese oligarchs for a start, Russian oligarchs. They've got their own ideas about what they would like to see. And they've been invited into that round table think tank network to discuss how they want to collectively go about achieving their ends. Because even though they squabble and fight with each other, this network is a power struggle in it. You can see that power struggle in it, played out, occasionally as a kinetic war at its worst. Even though that exists, there's an agreement, I would suggest, as to the ultimate destination. And the ultimate destination is the imposition of technological control on populations. That's what they want. Everyone agrees on that. Everybody agrees that. That's what we want. We want to be able to control our populations using technological means, because that's easier. That's better for us. So as long as that's the agreed, and when I talk about the global public-private partnership, I would put the monetary system, whatever that turns out to be, the monetary system as like the mycelium layer that binds the whole thing together. So talking about like the things between SWIFT and Russian and Chinese alternatives. Was it SIPs and I can't remember the acronyms, but the Russian alternatives to SWIFT. That is kind of like the balkanization of the monetary system, you would think, but it's all interoperable. That they've gone ahead with this balkanization after they've agreed interoperability. So sure, the systems can still work together. I mean, the Russian system is 80% based on the SWIFT system, so they're compatible. But just for now, it suits our narrative, if you like, to say that to balkanize the monetary system. But I mean, what you commonly see is decentralization, which is what multipolarity requires. Geopolitical, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of global monetary systems, in terms of supply chains, energy corridors, everything that needs to be balkanized to establish the system. But once it is balkanized, then the point is that you lay in the infrastructure from the beginning. So if you think IMEC will it already does. IMEC already connects in multiple places to the Belt and Road Initiative. Haifa being a good example. Both IMEC and Haifa and the Belt and Road Initiative connect at Haifa is one point, but there are many others. I would suggest it's an illusion that's being sold to us in order to get us to go along with a global governance structure, because then we go, oh, well, that one's better than the other one. We'll go along with this one.
Something that has always fascinated me is the way in which animals exist. So I go to the Kruger National Park regularly. I think you might know. I always talk about it. I think everybody in the world should go to the Kruger Park at least once in their life. It really is beautiful, and you're very close to nature, and it's a very big game park. It's like the size of Israel, so that you have a lot of space to play with. And one thing that has always struck me is the way in which animals exist. You'll have no fences, right? But you'll have giraffes, and just a little bit further along, you'll have lions. And these are not allies. Yet, they exist in harmony until they don't. But there's a sense of respect, and there's a sense of, there's a mutual kind of negotiation that occurs just naturally.
I mean, conflict is created when people don't act responsibly, with care, with due care and compassion, and, well, at least respect as you said, you used the word there, respect for each other. Now, why do humans do that? Sometimes, who knows? There are lots of social problems that lead to all kinds of knock-on effects in terms of the way that we interact with each other. But animals are a good good thing to talk about in terms of the way animals construct their societies. So if you look at lions, for example, a pride of lions is a family hub with a dominant male that protects that pride from the other pride. But when the prides expand territory, one male lion kills another one and will probably kill all the cubs as well, so that there's a new bloodline. So that's pretty brutal politics. Politics at its most visceral. And an animal, and that's an animal. Not, I mean, I'm using lion, and different animals do behave in different ways in different political systems, but they've got political systems. But the advantage human beings have always had, evolutionary, and why we are the apex predator, is because, despite our natures, we're animals just like any other animal, but despite our natures, we've always had. We're not physically stronger than many animals. We're not better physically adapted to our environments. In fact, worse than in many respects. But we have always, our evolutionary advantage, apart from opposable thumbs, is that we can work together to achieve collective objectives. That's what we can do with like no other animal. No other animal can work in the way that we do and apply our problem solving skills and develop strategies to overcome problems. There's no other animal can do that like as we do. Now that's given us an advantage, and what have we done with it? We've done wonderful things. We've built and amazing things, but we've also caused total carnage and havoc. Right, so it's a double-edged sword. But there is no reason why, and nor do we need anyone to tell us what to do in order to be able to function as a society. It's just unnecessary. Human beings know how to conduct themselves and live in peace. Then it's just innate to who we are. That's our nature. Sure, what happens then is that conflict arises and we've got no mechanism to resolve that conflict other than killing each other. But we are capable, and we've already done it. We've already created systems that enable us to do that without killing each other. Right? Law is a system that enables us to resolve conflicts without killing each other. So we can live by we've already got the mechanisms in place to live without any kind of imposition of any kind of order. We can do that. We have done it for thousands of years. So, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent here, and I can't remember the initial question. I mean, but so my contention is, although if you live in Africa, I can understand why you would prefer multipolarity to unipolarity. Certainly, from my perspective, looking at this from a relatively privileged position, that in the long run is not going to serve your interests any more than it serves mine. I mean, I'll be dead by the time this plays out. But well, I will, mate. I mean, this isn't people are going to, I mean, as multipolarity rolls out, like all the other systems that roll out, like digital currency and digital ID, it will come with incentives. People will think, wow, digital currency is great. Food's half the price with digital currency. Brilliant. Let's have digital currency. Then the control systems, once people have adopted it, then the control systems will start shutting down everybody's freedom. And ultimately where this ends it up with, and this sounds like hyperbole, but it isn't, because it's hardwired and hard built into the digital control system that is being delivered with multipolarity, is the end of human freedom, the end of it. That is their goal. That's where they want us to be. They want us to be utterly subservient to their rule. And that's the only reason why ultimately you and I are even talking about the difference between unipolarity and multipolarity.
And I said transhumanism because that's also part of the long-term goal, is to remove humanity from itself.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at what the people that are currently in charge of the Trump administration and the development of neuro and their interest in the development of neurotechnology, they openly state, one of their house philosophers, this guy Nick Land, he openly states that we need to be technoplastic beings. That we serve no value, we have no purpose. So people like him, people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Curtis Yarvin, all that they have, well, certainly, you look at Mark Anderson, Larry Ellison, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Palmer Luckey, all these people, I have strongly argued, are in control at the moment of the Trump administration. Well, what that means is they're in control of the US government. So that's a new class of oligarchs. See, there again, you've got a new breed of oligarchs that have come up. And Thiel and Alex Karp, from Palantir, they both sit on the steering group of the Bilderberg Committee. Now they have, so they've got immense influence. I mean, Thiel has often said one joke he wasn't joking, but it's funny from my perspective. He said, if only there were people sitting around the world that were sitting around planning the future. Oh, if only, Peter. Well, other than you, mate, because you are actually doing that. Because you're on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group, who created the European Union. This is a group of people who decided that we would have a European Union and then built one. Now that none of them are elected, none of them are politicians, none of them have got anything to do with government. Well, a few occasionally get invited, usually when they've retired, to and then they set about creating a continental union and did it. Right? So these are the people that can control things like a multipolar world order.
Okay, time is against us. You mentioned earlier a pride of lions, and I was quite impressed that you knew the collective noun for that. Do you know the collective noun for camels?
Is it a train?
No, it is a carton.
A carton of camels. Fantastic. Carton of camels. Brilliant.
I'm a dad. I'm allowed to make a dad joke.
Yeah, that's great. A carton of camels.
All right, Ian, how can I follow your work?
It's at my website, which is iandavis.com. You can follow my work on my Substack, which is iandavis.substack.com. My name's iandavis.com, all one word. You can get my latest book at all one word, lowercase, thetechnocraticdarkstate.com, and also follow my work at Unlimited Hangout, which is at unlimitedhangout.com. And also, my work is often syndicated with people like the Off Guardian and Technocracy News and Trends and Geopolitics and Empire. And also, please check out the Independent Media Alliance, because we're often talking about these kind of things. That's me.
As always, Ian Davis, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
It was my pleasure. Thanks very much for inviting me.